What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going over my wide receiver tier rankings for week 8 of the fantasy football season. If you do enjoy, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Let's get right into it. Starting us off with our tier 1 wide receivers, he has a permanent spot as the number 1 option, even when Justin Jefferson returns, just because this offense is high flying and the things Tyreek Hill is doing on the football field this year is just unmatched by anybody. So he's going to be at number 1. And just to give you guys an idea of how insane Tyreek Hill's season has been so far, he's earning 0.37 targets per route ran, which is the most in the league. He's earning 0.95 fantasy points per route ran, which is insane. The guy in second is Stefon Diggs at 0.63. That's almost double. Then yards per route ran is where he's just lapping the field here. He's at 4.65. Just to give you guys an idea of how insane that is, because you might have no reference points to that. Stefon Diggs, who is incredible, and he's going to be number 2 here. Let me talk about him in like 30 seconds. He's at 2.68. AJ Brown, 3.1. Ja'Marr Chase at 2.23. Like, it's just insane how far above he is everybody else. He's earning 10 targets per game, a 32.5% target share, 47% market share of the team's air yards, and 130 yards per game with a touchdown. They have the highest implied team total of the week versus the Patriots. People are always like, oh, Bill tries to take out the best player. Yeah, I don't care. Good luck, Bill. And it's a really tough act to follow going right after Tyreek, but Stefon Diggs in his own right has been incredible this season. 100 yards per game, 11 targets, 33.5% target share. Like I just said, he's pretty much second, or at least in the top 5 in most of those advanced player statistics. 80% weighted opportunity share, nearly a 45% market share of the team's air yards. High implied team total here versus Tampa Bay, who's more of a pass funnel defense. They currently rank 21st versus wide receivers. Yeah, fire him up as your locked and loaded wide receiver, bona fide stud every single week. And Keenan Allen is going to round out the top 3 here of the Los Angeles Chargers. A really easy matchup versus Chicago Bears. They're kind of middle of the pack versus wide receivers, but his consistency every single week and upside is matched with the other 2 that we did talk about. Not quite on Tyreek Hill's level, but it is up there in terms of volume every single week. 95 yards per game, 10.5 targets, over 7.5 catches, 30% target share. Got a really good quarterback, Justin Herbert, getting the football and a fun offense. So yeah, Keenan Allen, a bona fide stud. Then at number 4, might feel a bit high, but I think he deserves to be here. He's just one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL, especially for fantasy purposes, especially in PPR leagues, because he doesn't have quite the ADOT these other guys have. Like Tyreek Hill's at 12.4, Diggs at 12.1, Allen at 11.3. He's sitting at 7.9. But that just makes him such a nice safety valve for Jared Goff in this offense. But Amon-Ra St. Brown has been incredible. 11 targets per game, 8.5 catches per game, 92 yards, half a touchdown, 30.5% target share, and a pretty soft matchup versus this Raiders defense with their 27-point implied team total this week. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Sun God, definitely deserves to be in this tier 1 group. Then we have a few more rounding out our tier 1 group, and I love talking about wide receivers. It's such a nice breath of fresh air compared to the running backs, because there's just so many good elite level wide receivers in the NFL, and they're so fun to watch. But coming in at number 5 here, it's going to be Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. And while this offense hasn't exactly lived up to expectations so far this year, the 49ers have honestly not been that great versus receivers. They're bottom half in the league, currently ranking 22nd versus the position. And when you have the talent that Ja'Marr Chase has, and hopefully the good quarterback that he has in Joe Burrow, I know it's been a bit of a iffy start to the season dealing with that injury, but we've seen some flashes from him. But when you're getting nearly 12 targets per game on 8.5 catches, 92 yards, 33% target share, ADOT's pretty low this season at 7.8. I think we can kind of attest that to Joe Burrow really not feeling himself so far. But, I mean, he has to be in the tier 1 group with the talent that he has. And then at number 6, and honestly, might feel a bit low because I love the spot versus Washington, but it's AJ Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. And this dude has been an absolute stud the past month or so now, just continually getting over 100 yards every single week. 115 receiving yards on the season per game, 10.5 targets, 32.7% target share, a massive 83% weight opportunity share, and a 48% market share of the team's air yards. And it's a really good spot versus the Commanders. They're currently ranking 25th versus receivers. So yeah, start AJ Brown with confidence. I don't think I need to tell you that. And then rounding out our tier 1 group, he has to be on here. I don't really love the matchup for the Rams overall this week, but to not have him in the tier 1 group, I think would probably have to be a crime. So Cooper Kupp makes it in, and while it was not a great week last week, he did show that he is human. I thought he was going to be a lock for just double-digit targets and about 100 yards every single week and just at least double-digit points, and he showed that is not the case. 2 catches for 29 yards last week versus Pittsburgh, and that was a pretty good matchup. Pittsburgh has not been good versus receivers this season, but for 3 weeks, Cooper Kupp's volume is still elite, even though last week was a bit of a stinker. 9.5 targets per game, 36% target share, 84% weighted opportunity share. The problem here is the Dallas Cowboys are allowing the second fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. I know they lost Trevon Diggs, but this is still a solid defense, and they'll have a 19-point implied team total here, but it's Cooper Kupp. You should still have confidence in him, and he will bounce back. And moving on to tier 2, and some of these guys could definitely make a case for tier 1, but I do have a bit of a drop off as far as projections are concerned. But we're going to lead off with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp's teammate. I couldn't put him in tier 1 because I think he's a little bit below Cooper Kupp, but he has shown that he is still going to be a force in this offense. And while Cooper Kupp sucked last week, Puka Nacua did not. He was quite busy in that game and was very productive. And if you started him, you were pretty happy with the production that you got. 33% target share on the season, 11 targets per game, nearly 8 catches, 107 receiving yards. Now keep in mind half that's without Cooper Kupp, so the averages per game are obviously going to be down from that, but he's a force in this offense, and Matthew Stafford looks two ways. It's Puka and it's Cooper Kupp, and it's more than likely going to stay that way. Then we have Davante Adams here of the Las Vegas Raiders, and I realize the quarterback play on this offense is not going to be great, but we do get Jimmy G back. We're in prime time. They're 8.5 point dogs, so they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. Only an 18.5 implied team total, but 10 targets per game on a 30% target share. Detroit's bottom half of the league when it comes to fantasy points allowed per game to the wide receiver position. So the talent that you have with Adams, despite everything else, he is going to be still an elite level wide receiver that you're going to start each and every single week with the upside that he offers. And this one might be a bit of a surprise for being this high up in tier 2 with the quarterback that we have on this offense, but Tyler Bagent, I think that's what it is, T-Bag, whatever you want to call him, of the Chicago Bears, throwing DJ Moore the football, but DJ Moore still had 9 targets in that game, 8 catches, and was still productive. Obviously didn't have a monster game, but if we're going to at least get double-digit targets and or at least catchable footballs, I mean, shoot, sign me up for DJ Moore. We know how talented he is. And don't even get me started on the matchup. The Chargers are dead last, 32nd versus wide receivers, allowing over 200 receiving yards per game, 1.5 receiving touchdowns, and over 46 fantasy points specifically to wide receivers. So DJ Moore, as long as he can get some halfway decent production out of the quarterback position this week, he should eat once again. Adam Thielen, another guy that's really high up my rankings, and you're probably wondering where a couple of these bigger names are, like a CeeDee Lamb and whatnot, but I just go specifically off my projections. There's no bias in there. I just run them through on my system, and this is what it spits out. But with what we've seen so far this year, the volume that Adam Thielen gets, quarterback play is horrendous. Whether it's Andy Dalton, Bryce Young back there, it's obviously not great. But he gets the football, and that's all you can ask for in fantasy. I mean, talent, having all the talent in the world is great. Being young, explosive, it's amazing. But what it all comes down to is if you're not getting the volume or not, I mean, that's what matters the most. You can't do anything if you're not getting opportunities. And Adam Thielen is getting all the opportunity in the world, nearly 10 targets per game, over 8 catches, 84 yards, a 28% target share. Not the greatest matchup in the world versus the Houston Texans defense. They kind of suck more versus the run than they do versus the pass. But we should be trailing in this game, and it should be close. And we know Thielen's pretty much locked in for double-digit targets. And if you're going to get double-digit targets versus the Houston Texans defense, I don't care. I will take it. Adam Thielen has been a PPR monster this season. Although if you do own him, trading him away to see if you can get anyone to bite on like maybe even a DJ Moore or a Davante Adams, Puka Nacua, if you can turn to that, that would be something I'd be pretty interested in long term, I think. But Thielen should be a pretty safe bet this week. And speaking of CeeDee Lamb, he does make the tier 2 group here. It's just the production. I mean, he has had some decent games this year, but the volume that he gets is not quite at the par of some of these other guys. Only a 22% target share in the season. Has not really gotten to the end zone whatsoever. Only a 0.17 touchdowns per game, a 29% market share of the team's air yards, which is also pretty low. 5 catches per game on 80 yards and 8 out of only 9.7. I'd like to see some more explosiveness out of CeeDee Lamb, some more deep shots. We just haven't really been getting that. And it's not a great matchup versus the Rams either. They're allowing the 4th fewest points in the wide receiver position. So while CeeDee Lamb is still a wide receiver 1, borderline wide receiver 1 every single week, my expectations for this game are somewhat low. They do have a pretty high implied team total at 25.5, but again, this is not the absolute greatest matchup in the world. And standing in the NFC here, we have Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the only problem is right now, we do not know who the quarterback is going to be for the 49ers because Brock Purdy is currently in concussion protocol. So if he happens to miss, we're going to get stuck with Sam Darnold. And while I realize Brock Purdy, he's a bit of a system quarterback. Like, the guy's not the most talented out there. Now, he plays the system to perfection. And the poor performance we saw last week was right after we had the, initial concussion. So if we just write that off, I mean, he was still playing very well in that game versus Minnesota prior to that. So I'd love it for Purdy to be the quarterback. There's no Deebo Samuel. And, I mean, Brandon Ayuk's just going to eat everything up. And he's been really good in the season. 48% market share of the team's air yards, 77% weight opportunity share, 29% target share, 85 yards per game. And his yards per route ran statistics are actually really good. They're second only behind Tyreek Hill, the data set that I am looking at as of right now. So if Sam Darnold is the quarterback, while I feel like if he just doesn't completely script the system, Ayuk should still be fine, but I would say it's a bit of a downgrade. I still think he'd be in the borderline tier 2 group, but honestly, tier 3 like the top end of tier 3 might be a better home for him, but as of right now, I just don't know the answer. Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders, wide receiver 2 on this team, although his production numbers and opportunity is really not that far off a guy like Davante Adams. Like Adams on the season is seeing 10 targets per game. Jakobi Meyers is at 9.3, 0.83 touchdowns per game, which is better than Davante Adams, and your 28% target share over 6 catches per game. While he doesn't really have a household name, Jakobi Meyers has been balling out so far this season. And like I said, for Adams, it is a pretty solid matchup versus the Detroit Lions. Then we have a couple of Bucs wide receivers here in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. There's really not too much separating these two in my projections this week. Mike Evans is more of a big play threat, 13.4 for his ADOT. Chris Godwin currently sitting at 9.8, but their target shares are very similar, both seeing 7.83 targets per game on a 25% target share. So yeah, I like both, and while they're different types of wide receivers, projection-wise, they do grade out pretty much the same. Chris Godwin's got a better floor because he's a short yardage guy, but Mike Evans has a bigger ceiling, and he's way more likely to find the end zone, as Chris Godwin has not yet done that so far this season. And then we have 3 more for this tier 2 group, which I realize is a pretty long list, but Christian Kirk has been a model of consistency this season, and who would have known? He is the wide receiver 1 on this team. I think we all thought it was going to be Calvin Ridley, but I don't want to call him an afterthought, but he definitely hasn't performed to expectations this season. He's actually really far down my rankings. We're not going to see him probably till tier 3 or tier 4 at this point, which is really surprising. I thought he would be a guy that could be potentially in the tier 1 group almost week out after week 1, and then obviously was not the case. But a 23% target share for Christian Kirk, 7.5 targets per game, over 5 catches, 67 receiving yards. He's about as safe as it gets out there. Don't really care what the matchup is, although Pittsburgh hasn't exactly been the greatest team versus opposing wide receivers this season. They currently rank 30th, allowing the 3rd most points per game. Michael Pittman, tough matchup last week, and obviously the overall numbers weren't great besides just one big play for a touchdown. If you take that away, which I hate when people say that, just take away the best play they did, and it wouldn't have been great because, yeah, well, no shit. But still, I mean, it was a tough matchup versus Cleveland. He got there, but the opportunity wasn't amazing with only 2 catches, but he's still seeing 9 targets per game on a 27% target share. Josh Downs is rising up the rankings, though. They might end up being more of a 1A, 1B situation, or instead of Michael Pittman just being the alpha dog there. In the matchup versus New Orleans, not great. 12 fewest points per game of the position, but with the volume that Michael Pittman gets, he definitely deserves to be in this tier 2 group as for right now. And then the last guy that we're going to talk about, Jalen Waddle, last spot for the tier 2 group. And he's just on such a good offense. It's going to keep him relevant all season long. 7 targets per game, 5 catches, 23% target share. Patriots are not my favorite matchup in the world, but when you have the highest implied team total of the week, and you have a quarterback that throws the ball for 300 yards every single week almost, and a high-flying offense that puts up a ton of points, Waddle is still going to be a very fantasy-relevant wide receiver. And moving on to our tier 3 wide receivers, hopefully it's not as long as the list as is all for tier 2, but we're going to shoot for like the top 36, top 40 receivers this week. So I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker because I don't want this to be a 30-minute video. But the first guy here is going to be Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. And while he's not a household name and the matchup isn't amazing versus Carolina, it's not a good defense overall, but they do rank 12th versus receivers. We're talking about a guy that's averaging just under 100 yards per game at 91, 7 targets per game, 22% target share. C.J. Stroud's obviously been pretty good for the Texans this year. Now, he is completing less than 60% of his passes, but at least he's not throwing interceptions, which is nice. So Nico Collins, a very solid wide receiver 2/flex play week in, week out, really despite the matchup. And we have Chris Olave from the New Orleans Saints, and while the opportunity is there, getting plenty of volume, and we know the talent is there as well. Dude is a stud, seeing just over 9.5 targets per game on a 27% target share. He had a 15.1, 926 air yards, and a 40% market share of the team's air yards. It's just not adding up because the quarterback play obviously has not been too great here, only 67 yards per game. Middle of the road matchup versus the Colts. They're bottom half in the league when it comes to wide receivers, but this is a very beatable defense. And if Chris Olave is going to go off at some point, this is probably one of the spots. We're playing in a dome, so not to worry about any weather here. They're on the road, so if you can get a buy low opportunity for Chris Olave, this might not be the worst week to do it. I don't know the future matchups off the top of my head, but I do like the one for this week. And if he does go off, the price will go up. So if you're trying to buy him low, this is definitely a decent opportunity for it. And didn't he get pulled over for something? Tried to use the play for the Saints card. Obviously didn't work out too well for him. So hopefully the matchup works out better for him this week than he did trying to get out of whatever he was it like reckless driving or speeding? I forget what it was. I saw Justin Ross as well. Got arrested for something. So not a great week to be an NFL wide receiver, apparently. And while I might be a bit high on him this week, he is grading out pretty well in my projections. And it's Kendrick Bourne of the New England Patriots. And while I don't feel like a sexy play, yeah, I think he is firmly in play this week as a flex guy, because you're probably not using him as your wide receiver too. But it's a decent matchup versus Miami. They currently rank 24th versus wide receivers, But on the season, we've actually had some decent opportunity out of Kendrick Bourne, and they should be trailing this one. They are 9.5 point dogs, so it is a positive game script. 46.5 point over under, which is the highest of the entire week. 7.3 targets per game, nearly 5 catches, 0.43 receiving touchdowns, 21.5% target share, and a 23% market share of the team's air yards. So for me, I like Kendrick Bourne. There's some touchdown upside as he has been finding the end zone kind of often this season for being this down low. Not like he's a tier 1 kind of receiver. So I do like the upside that we've seen from Kendrick Bourne, and we've seen double-digit target games for him in the past. So he is kind of high in the rankings for me. Was a little bit surprised, but the model does like him. Up next, we have Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, and he is the number 1 receiver for Lamar Jackson outside of Mark Andrews, but definitely has solidified himself in the rookie. We know he's got upside, 28.3% target share, over 7.5 targets per game on 63 receiving yards. Just not really finding the end zone, but great matchup versus the Cardinals, currently ranking 27th versus wideouts, and the Ravens have one of the highest implied team totals of the week on the road in Arizona with the 26.5, and they come in as 8.5 point favorites as well. So I do like Zay Flowers quite a bit here. Marquise Brown in the same game on the other side. Bit of a tougher matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens defense, 10th fewest points allowed per game to the wide receiver position, but the opportunity that Marquise Brown gets is always going to keep him in play. 42.5% market share of the team's air yards, 28% target share, 8.5 targets per game, and a 71.6% weight opportunity share. 8.5 point dogs, so they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. We have Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. Honestly feels a bit low. I think you could make a case for him being the higher end for tier 3, maybe even low end tier 2, but that's just how the projections played out for me. But pretty good spot here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. There's only a really low 18.5 implied team total, which is probably what's keeping him down a bit. He hasn't really gotten to the end zone so far this year, but a 24.5% target share, 7.5 targets per game. And surprisingly, believe it or not, the Eagles are second to last versus wide receivers this season, allowing 44.8 points per game to the wide receiver position, 178 yards and 1.3 receiving touchdowns. So Terry McLaurin, assuming you don't have any other better options, he is a pretty safe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 this week. Another big name that you drafted really high in drafts this year, but we could not have accounted for Aaron Rodgers to get hurt so early. Unfortunately, this guy, who should honestly be tier 1, tier 2, week in, week out with a decent quarterback, and you have Zach Wilson throwing you the ball. Obviously, the upside isn't going to be as great. Low totals every week. Still some good opportunity. Over 8.5 targets per game, 31.5% target share, 80% weight opportunity share, and a 45.5% market share of the team's air yards. And the Giants are bottom half of the league versus wide receivers, so Garrett Wilson is certainly startable this week. Then we have the rookie Jordan Addison, who went absolutely nuclear versus the San Francisco 49ers. Massive game, and had that one insane 60-yard touchdown. It was like a post route, and it was an interception, and then he took the ball right back out from number 7's hand and took it to the end zone, which was a nice redemption story because earlier in the game it was like a slant route, and Jordan Addison got bullied, ended up being an interception. So it was some nice, sweet justice there for the Minnesota Vikings offense from Jordan Addison, but no Justin Jefferson. He's the wide receiver 1 of this offense. We know the upside. Now, I don't like Kirk Cousins on the road or away from home. 21.5 implied team total, which is not the greatest, but we know the upside with Addison. Tougher matchup versus Green Bay. They're worse versus the run than they are versus the pass. This game was at home. I would have Addison higher in my rankings, but this being a road game and the implied team total that we have for the Vikings, still going to be a little bit lower on the list for me. Then we have Calvin Ridley, who it just sucks having him this low, but he is so up or down each week. You don't really know what to expect. It's a really good matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're currently ranked 30th versus wide receivers, but Christian Kirk has been way more consistent. But just know, Calvin Ridley has that tier 1 upside in him, but with how much he sways every single week, it's really hard to have him in that tier 1, tier 2 group as far as his projections are concerned. We're talking 6.5 targets per game, which is fine, 21% target share, and a nice 8 out of 15, 37% market share of the team's air yards, but still under 4 catches per game and 52 receiving yards. So it's just been really tough to trust Calvin Ridley. Devontae Smith has also had a really bad season so far, especially for where you drafted him. I do like the Eagles offense in general this week. It's a really good spot versus the Commanders, 25th versus wide receivers, but pretty similar numbers to Calvin Ridley, where 50 receiving yards per game pretty much, 4.5 catches, 7 targets, 22% target share, and they both have 0.29 receiving touchdowns with a pretty decent ADOT. So 2 very similar players, and they both end up being very similar in projections this week. Moving on to tier 4, it gets less exciting here, but still viable options because wide receiver is pretty deep. But I have both Deontay Johnson and George Pickens back to back here. Both are going to be viable pieces. We saw Pickens get 18 points. We saw Deontay Johnson still involved in the offense in his return. And we have seen in the past when Deontay is healthy, he's the guy that gets the majority of the targets. Both these guys are pretty talented. The unfortunate part is that their quarterback play from Kenny Pickett is obviously not the best. Both are fine as deeper league flex plays or just flex plays in general, depending on your situation. There was Joshua Palmer, Los Angeles Chargers, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure that it is Joshua Palmer or not, but it's close enough. He's got a Chargers jersey, and I know it's not Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, so assumption is yes. Looks somewhat similar to him, at least when I've seen him on the football field, but we know Palmer, whenever Mike Williams or Keenan Allen are out, he always slides right into that wide receiver 2 role in this offense, and he tends to excel. He had over 100 yards last week, and this is a pretty good matchup versus the Bears, so I'm in on him. Whenever you can get a wide receiver 2 in a pretty prominent offense and a really good role, and they have a high implied team total, and they're facing a bad defense, and they're playing at home in a dome, I mean, yeah, he's a very, very viable flex play this week. Amari Cooper, quarterback situation is absolutely dreadful with PJ Walker. No Deshaun Watson once again, and I've seen PJ Walker play football, and I'll be honest, it's not too pretty, but as talented as Amari Cooper is, we did see him have that one big game versus the 49ers, and the weather was pretty bad in that one. So Amari makes the tier 4 list, but expectations need to be very, very low. Tier 5 for me, Courtland Sutton, really any of the Broncos wide receivers. It's ugly, but he ended up projecting the best. Their 19-point implied team total is pretty low, 7.5-point dogs at home and Mile High. Still seeing 6 targets per game. He's got touchdown upside, which does keep him afloat, 23% target share. DK Metcalf could be higher, but I don't know the exact health situation on Metcalf yet. But if he is healthy, we could probably move him in that tier 4 group, maybe even tier 3. Not a great matchup versus Cleveland, though, as they are allowing the fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. It's not like DK has exactly been amazing this year either. 67 yards on 6 targets and a 20% target share. Big play upside, but probably not going to happen versus that stout Browns defense. Michael Thomas, also viable. Gets targets, just quarterback play once again. Not great, which is kind of a common theme down here. If you just have poor quarterback play, you can be as talented as you want. It's just not going to really matter. But 7.5 targets per game, 21% target share. Middle of the road matchup for the New Orleans Saints here facing off versus the Colts. But we have seen in the past their pass defense can get shredded. So I think Thomas is fine. And we finally saw him get into the end zone last week in prime time versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's actually going to do it for the top 36. We could keep going. Just some names off the top of my list here. Drake London, Tyler Lockett, Rashee Rice, T. Higgins, Tank Dell, all viable options. Kind of crazy that we didn't even have T. Higgins make the list here. It's been a really graceful fall for him. But he would be, if we kept going, T. Higgins would be right here. He still sees opportunity, but man, only 2.8 catches per game on 7 targets, 19.9% target share. You'd really like to see more, and we all drafted him pretty high. We're talking like the 3rd round. Some of you might have even went in the 2nd round for T. Higgins. You've definitely not gotten the return you've wanted, but it is a good matchup versus San Francisco. Hopefully the tide can change here, but it's definitely not been pretty. With that being said, that's all I got for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. I'll try to have my tight end and defense rankings out later on today or tomorrow if you want to check those out. But I wish you all the best of luck tonight in your Thursday night matchups, and I'll see you all next time.